More than 7 million displaced and over 12,000 dead.
The war in Ukraine, and this morning fighting around the country's second largest city.
Israel has launched a massive military operation in northern Gaza.
In southern Turkey, buildings crumble like sand.
Will break up, spilling the remainder of its cargo and polluting the pristine beaches.
Do you find that after watching or reading the news that you feel angry or sad or even disturbed? If so, what can we do about that? How can we be at peace while keeping up to date with the news of the world? If you're interested, keep watching. Many of us are affected when we watch the news that's created by popular media corporations. After watching it, our emotions may become disturbed. We may find ourselves angry, irritable, or even sad and depressed. Some people, after watching the news on a daily basis and checking frequently, may find themselves chronically distressed. Maybe our view of life and the world changes, starts to become negative and dark, and maybe we feel that, society is hopeless, humanity is doomed. So let's take a look together at what is the content of the news and media that we're consuming? How long are we consuming it for? And in what way do we absorb and ingest this information? And then how can we be at peace with it? The news, as we know it, was initially meant to inform us, to notify us about things in the world, whether it's with politics, the environment, business. Any kind of news initially is to inform us so that we can have more information to make better decisions. But news has evolved. It's now become a very profitable industry. So its purpose is not only to inform us, but to catch our attention and entertain us and keep us entertained, to keep us consuming. A lot of the information is intended to trigger us, to trigger our emotions and reactions. When our emotions and reactions are triggered, we get involved. We stay connected with it. It's often toxic. This toxic information, which is attractive and entertaining, actually can often encourage anger, greed, and misunderstanding. So a lot of news is intentionally divisive. For example, with the political left and the right, the news wants us to take one side and see the other side as an opponent. This way, it encourages conflict, encourages divisiveness. So although it's not fair to say all the news is toxic and bad, but I think it's safe to say that much of the news, because it's meant to just trigger us and attract us and keep us wanting to consume it, it's garbage. It's unhealthy information. And it's kind of like snack food. Snack food is the saltiest, sweetest, tastiest kind of food. It makes us want to keep eating and consume it. But what happens when we have too much snack food? We get sick. But if we recognize that a lot of this information that we're ingesting is unhealthy, then we have to be careful. Because if we ingest too much, what's going to happen to the health of our mind? All this toxic information that we absorb, it eventually becomes the content of our consciousness. And if we look at consciousness like a container, if we fill a container with trash, it becomes a trash can. If we fill a container with food, it becomes a pantry. It becomes a refrigerator where we can access nutrition. So what are you filling your container with? And do you want to become a garbage can or a storehouse filled with nutritious information? How often do we watch the news? Is it possibly too much? Well, we can ask ourselves, How much do I need to know? For some of us, it could be our job that requires us to know a certain amount of information or access the news frequently, or it could be because we're socially engaged. We're involved in social activism, so we need to know what's happening in order to be able to respond. Or maybe you just have a genuine concern about the world and you want to know. You want to be able to then do something. But if we're not planning to do anything, then how much news do we really need to watch? How much information do we really need to consume? If we're not planning to do anything, do we need to know the details? Or are we just stimulating and entertaining ourselves with toxic information? Is it possible that we're watching and reading without much self-awareness? When we're watching the news, are we aware of what we feel, how we're reacting? Are we aware of then what thoughts are going on in our mind? The evaluations or the judgments we're making. It's my observation that when most of us read the news, we're often unaware and we mistake news as fact. We mistake a story as reality. So we all know about fake news, which is news that's completely false. It was intentionally created to confuse people or to cause misunderstanding. And some news can be real or just facts and information that's presented by someone who saw or heard something and they want to share this information. Whether it's fake news or real news, if we look closely, can't we actually say that no matter what, it's all false? Because that information is just someone's subjective perception. It's one person's or a group of people's views and observations, which are based on what they see, what they hear, and how they evaluate and judge it. That's all very subjective. So from the writers to the editors to the producers of a news corporation, all of this information is filtered through their subjective perceptions, their individual views of the world. So when we forget that the news is created based on these collective perceptions, then we make the mistake of taking a story to be truth. We mistake a collection of words and images to be reality. Just like when we're driving on the road and we see a sign pointing to such and such a town, New York City. Do we mistake the sign as New York City? Probably not. We know it's just a sign. Mistaking the stories that are presented in the news is just like mistaking the name of a place on a road sign as the actual place itself. Because what the news is reporting is just representations, right? Any news or story is presenting information that's already after the fact. Essentially, the story is already outdated because the situation has changed. So if we absorb the information of the news and media with awareness, with mindfulness, we can see that all of it is just symbols, words, and representations of our world. It can be useful information, but we have to remember that it's essentially just a story. If we have this awareness, we're less likely to fall prey to someone else's views, someone else's opinions, and then become disturbed or agitated by it. With awareness, we know it's just one person's view. And if we read and watch the news mindfully, we can also be mindful of ourselves. How do we feel as we're reading? What kind of emotions are arising as we're reading through this story or looking at these vivid images? What kind of evaluations or judgments are going on in our mind? And are we starting to become disturbed? If so, if we have that mindfulness, we can stop. we can take a moment to not read any further. Take a pause, relax ourselves, relax the body and mind, and just be aware of what's going on internally. With awareness of our internal state, we'll be clear of it. We won't be confused by it. And those disturbing emotions will settle and calm. And our mind will be clear. Then we can continue reading with this more perceptive kind of awareness. With awareness, we also know how much to watch. If we don't need to know all the details, we don't need to read further. We have the basic idea of what's happening, and that can be enough. When we know that reality can't be captured in a story, then we have peace with whatever we encounter, with whatever we see, hear, read, or ingest. Our mind is at peace because we have clarity. We can see it as a story. With that clarity, we'll also experience compassion. When we see terrible, saddening stories, instead of reacting with anger or confusion, we just know that, oh, these people are suffering. They're experiencing a lot of suffering. And I also experience suffering. So what can I do to help? If I don't have the resources to help, then what can I do? What can you do if you feel you don't have the resources to help? You feel you don't have the power to help people who are suffering, people who you may not know but you see in the media. Well, one thing that we can do, no matter what resources we have, is we can be a peaceful and compassionate person. A peaceful and compassionate person, they're a source of freshness and a source of peace for other people. And that's a huge contribution. It's also important to take time to not ingest any information, to put down our devices, to put down the news, and just take time to disconnect, to disengage in a healthy way. We can go outside and see the world with our eyes, our own eyes and ears and body and mind in the present moment, to touch the world in the present moment with freshness. So many people find that it's healing to go into nature or just to take a walk on a street where you feel that the environment is pleasant, and just to look and hear and absorb all the information that comes to your senses and just enjoy and appreciate the freshness of that moment. In this way, we can be independent of the news. We can make use of the news and the information that's presented, but it doesn't rule our lives. It doesn't rule our perception of the world. We're independent because we have our own perception of the world. We have a perception that's fresh and that's wakeful and that's open to change and possibility. So I encourage you to try it. First, become aware of what is it that you're reading and ingesting. Is it healthy? Is it unhealthy? And can you choose more of the healthy, useful information? Second, you can choose how long of a period of time that you spend reading the news or absorbing media. And choose what's the right amount of time that's good for you, that you don't feel overwhelmed by it. And third, you can consume media mindfully. With a mindful awareness as you're reading the news, you know clearly the story that you're seeing, and you know clearly yourself and how you're reacting, how you're responding to those stories. With this mindful approach to media consumption, we can make use of the information without being used by the information. So I hope the video was useful for you. Feel free to comment, like, and share. In the meantime, be well.